So welcome again. Please get to know all these guys. We appreciate all the 6th District candidates being here today. Thank you very much. One of them will run against Fred Upton in November. And we must win that race to take back the U.S. House of Representatives and our country. It's up to us as voters in the Democratic primary on August 7th to choose the candidate that can beat Fred. Because for the first time in 32 years, Fred Upton is truly vulnerable. Woo! Yeah, he is. So we have a plethora, we have an embarrassment of riches with all wonderful candidates. We have to do our best to get them to know them, their platforms, to know them individually, to see who we think will be the best candidate to take on Fred. And so that's part of what's happening today. It's happening all over the region, a lot of forums like this. So we will have 2-minute introductions, all right? And then we will have 12 questions in a lightning round, 1 minute or less. Go over a lot of the basic issues, all right? Then we will have a short break, 10-minute break. And during that time, please turn in your questions, or any time, turn in your questions to the table where you came in. After the break, we will have audience questions. And please submit 1 per person. We will do as many as we can. If it's for one candidate, they will have 2 minutes to respond. If it's for all the candidates, again, it'll be 1 minute. Okay? Please help yourself to coffee, water, goodies, anytime. Restroom is here. Please turn your phones off. Now? Right now. Okay. And then finally, after the audience questions, we'll have a 1-minute wrap-up from each candidate. Any questions? Okay, all set. All right, in 2 minutes, please introduce yourself and tell us about your background, your career, and why you're running.
Sure.
Yep.
I'll just come down here for this. Let's do this, guys. All right.
Hi, my name is Eponine Garrett. I am a chemist. I also have a music performance minor, so I'm thinking we might have an after party with that piano. I currently work in chemistry as my job title is chemist. I do quality control testing on pharmaceutical ingredients at Pfizer in Kalamazoo. And I am running because we need A, to have youth representation, B, female representation, C, we need scientific fact in our environmental policy, and I'm also running because I am just a regular person. My dogs eat my shoes, I get up to go to work in the morning and campaign full time. I know what it's like to be a member of the working class. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. I believe in working together to make sure that all workers are represented with a living wage, getting a universal basic income for folks who aren't able to work, and ensuring that we are following our constitutional requirement for prosperity by having health care accessible and available for everyone through a single payer system. I'm running because it's time to get rid of Fred Upton, and it's time that we stop feeling so in love with the word congressman and start wondering when we're going to elect a congressperson. Fred Upton only pays attention to folks who have enough money to buy his time. I pay attention to anybody who wants to be heard, who wants to talk, and that's something I will commit to doing. We are bringing an energy to this district with our campaign that we have not seen before. I have the endorsement from the Young Democrats of Michigan. Getting that youth voter turnout is going to be critical, and getting people to the polls is going to be what it takes in order to win this seat. I'm here, I'm excited, and I'm ready to go, and I hope you're ready to go with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. I am Paul Clements. For 22 years, I've taught National Economic Development and Evaluation at Western Michigan University. My parents were very influenced by their Christian faith. When I was young, We traveled from Texas to Hong Kong, where we served the refugees coming out of China. We moved to India, where we worked on economic and social development with the poorest of the poor in the slums of Bombay and in the villages of Maharashtra. When I was a teenager, I followed my parents in choosing a life of service, but for me, the calling was also to social justice, because we can do everything we want to uplift the poor, but as long as the government is controlled by the wealthy, the poor really will be with us always. I was lucky to get a scholarship to Harvard. After college, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Gambia in West Africa. I went on for a PhD in public affairs at Princeton University, also on scholarship. When I came to West Michigan, I helped to start the Kalamazoo Interfaith Coalition for Peace and Justice, Michigan United, the Western Michigan University Climate Change Working Group. Why am I running for Congress? Well, you know, we have a president who encourages hatred and division, who doesn't respect basic democratic values of honesty and respect and the independence of the judiciary and of law enforcement. We need a Congress that can stand up to Donald Trump, and we know we are not going to get that from Fred Upton. But I'm also running to make this a transformational election. For decades, we've had an economy where all the benefits go to the very wealthy and none to the average American people. And I'm running to turn that around. Thank you.
Great.
My name is David Benak, and I'm running on the issues. I'm running to be your next congressional representative. I'm running because I believe we need a single-payer healthcare system right now, and we need it so that every single person in this country is covered and doesn't have to pay at the point of service. This is something I fought for when I was working on the Senator Sanders campaign, and as one of 3 people from the state of Michigan who chose to represent him at the National Democratic Platform Committee. I'm running for education. As a teacher and as an elected union rep for my teachers union, it is crucial to me that we protect public education, we fully fund it, and not another dime of our money goes to private schools. I am running on agriculture. My parents have a family farm. I grew up working on the farm, and this is something that I understand and that is crucial to this district. We need to have an agricultural system that is a food system. We need our agricultural economy to be revived, and we need to do that by supporting the family farms. I'm running about infrastructure. I'm the vice chair for the Michigan Democratic Party's Environment Caucus. And that means that I know we can build our infrastructure out in an environmentally safe way. That's what we have to do. Let's put that $1 trillion investment in infrastructure, let's employ 11 million people, and let's have a safe infrastructure that's going to support our economy. And the last thing is that we must have a progressive vision that draws people to the Democratic Party, that offers something transformational, that gets people excited to come out and vote. That's the only way we're going to win, is we get all those people who are on the sidelines involved and taking part, and that's the future of the Democratic Party. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Longjohn. Nice to see everybody out. I'll try and move around the posts where we can here. I'm running for Congress to defeat Fred Upton in the fall, in part because I believe that is the greatest way to resist President Trump's unhinged agenda. Congressman Upton has voted with President Trump now nearly 99% of the time. Last time it was 98.6% of his votes were aligned with the Trump agenda. I'm also running because I want to help improve the health and quality of life of everyone in this district. I just saw your YMCA logo over there, sir. I was the chief medical officer for all the YMCAs in the country. I worked with 2,700 YMCAs and 10,000 program sites over the last 7 years to bring prevention into our healthcare debate. President Obama named me one of the top 100 innovators in healthcare in America. I'm uniquely qualified to work on our healthcare issues here, not only in this district, but nationally. But you can't live your healthiest possible life by just fixing the healthcare system. You also have to recognize that you can't live your healthiest possible life in a toxic environment. You can't live your healthiest possible life if you don't know that you have a roof over your head or where your next meal is coming from. As someone who was on WIC With my older son, I know that single parents will often sacrifice quality food for quantity food when you don't know where that next meal is coming from. You can't live your healthiest possible life if the educational system doesn't work for you and your kids, if the cost of education is outpacing any kind of increases in wages or earnings. You can't have your healthiest possible life if the economy or the political system doesn't work for you. So campaign finance reform is also a huge part of what I'm working on, because the political system is working for the elites, too few of us, and we have to end the dark money in politics. As a physician, as a public health person, I'm running to improve the health quality of life of everyone in this district. And I need your help here in August and November. Thank you.
So Matt and I decided not to dance. So anyway, Kathy, thanks to all the cast Dems for this wonderful event and the beautiful venue. And thanks for everyone for coming out today, because it's such a gorgeous day and we haven't had that many of them. So again, thank you. I'm Rich Eicholtz. I'm a scientist, and after 30 years of experience in healthcare and green energy, leading teams of scientists and researchers and analysts and marketers, getting products out into the marketplace and developing them in the clinic and the lab, I'm now running for U.S. Congress to retire Fred Upton after 32 years, to restore fact-based thinking in Washington, and to build a 21st century green energy economy that works for everyone, protects our planet, and provides for universal health care. And just one aside, this always is a problem when I say it works for everyone, I start delineating some things and people say, well, did you not mean whatever? I'm going to just mention one thing right now because I think it's relevant, but there are a lot of other things, and that is we need to build a national broadband internet system so that everyone can participate in our economy. So after 32 years of Fred Upton, our economy has gone from 2% growth all the way down to 0%, literally 0% growth. What we need to do is get focused on building a green energy economy that is going to work for everyone, as I said, okay? So anyway, as your congressman, I'll be focused on that, and I need your help, though. This is, I'm in this to win in November, but I need your support now, and I'll need your vote in August. Thank you.
Well, I'm George Franklin, and I will win this with your help. Thank you, Cass County Democrats. Thank you, Kathy, for hosting us. I think I'm like a lot of you. The day after the last election, we all woke up and said, my God, what has happened here? And it was at that point I started saying, we've got to do something. We've got to do something. We've got to change what has just occurred. And then, of course, the Trump administration takes place, and the Republican Congress comes in to enable him to do what he's doing. He's attacking health care. They attack education. They attack the environment. They go after the LGBT community, and they even go after Planned Parenthood. What's coming next is Medicare and Social Security. You know it's coming. In 2020, we're going to have a $1 trillion deficit because of this tax bill they just passed. Not debt, this is the deficit, $1 trillion. And they're already using it as the excuse to go after Medicare and Social Security. I have spent my entire adult life working in Democratic politics. It started off when I was in college and I had buddies coming home in body bags from a thing called the Vietnam War. And I got involved in the McGovern campaign. And then I was a lawyer in the Carter campaign in 1976, and I served in the Carter administration in an advisory role. I served in the Clinton administration in an advisory role. I was then appointed and moved to Michigan about 30-some years ago, and was appointed to the Western Michigan University Board of Trustees, where I served for 11 years, twice being elected chairman, and growing the university to its highest enrollment ever in the year 2000 when I left. I now presently serve on the Levin Center Advisory Board at Wayne State University, where we teach congressional oversight. My time's up. Respectful of other people. Thank you.
Get an idea of some basic issues, and 1 minute or less. Okay, the first is public education. What is your viewpoint on charter schools and homeschooling? Did you attend public schools? If you have children, do your children attend or did attend public schools? And we'll start with Epi. Each of these questions, we'll start with the next down.
I'm going to lean forward a little bit, but that's okay.
Here, why don't we move this together?
Sure, maybe we can do that. Science in action. Okay, I'll do my best with 60 seconds here. Charter schools have a right to exist. They have a right to be in our district, in our country. They do not have a right to have access to public funding. They don't have a right to our taxpayer dollars. Same thing with homeschool. Homeschool is a viable option for a lot of students, but it should not be publicly funded. That money needs to go to our public schools. I have been to public school, homeschool, and private school as a kid. We did what we could to make, my parents made sure I was getting the best education I could get wherever we were across the state. We moved around a lot, and I did all my high school in public school. In my college, I was at Michigan Technological University, which is a public school. Had to take out tens of thousands of dollars in loans to be able to attend. So just education in general, I want to make sure that we are reducing or eliminating the cost of public universities, that we are funding our public schools strictly with our tax dollars, no other forms of school, private, charter, homeschool, or otherwise. And we need to make sure that teachers are getting a salary that is equal to the work they're doing. Thank you.
My daughters went to public schools. I went to public school in Chicago and California. They didn't have public schools in Hong Kong or India. One of the ways we need to rebuild this country is to give our children the education they need to prosper in the 21st century. And public schools is the foundation of democracy. That's going to be a main priority of mine. Today, charter schools are undermining public schools in many places. We have got to end that. But we also need excellent preschool for every child. We also need much better vocational education. We also need tuition-free community college, public university, at least for working families. So resources are not a barrier to the education you need to make your greatest contribution. As a professor, I understand the fundamental importance of public education for making our society, our economy, the strongest economy it can be with the broadest participation, and I will work for that in Congress.
Public education is one of the most important issues to me. I've spent every single day of my educational career and every single day teaching in the public school system, and I will be one of the strongest possible champions for maintaining the full funding, or for getting the full funding and then maintaining it for our public schools. As a elected rep for my teachers union, I will make sure that we get real representation for our teachers, and that means we need a Wagner Act for public sector unions, so public sector workers have the rights they need in unions. That's one of the most fundamental things we have. And we need to do really innovative things like what they're doing in Allegan right now, the Allegan County Area Technical Education Center. It's a really innovative program where they're getting kids from high school into technical and vocational training and moving them forward in a way that's going to make them successful in life.
I'm a product of public education in this district. I think I'm the only candidate who grew up here, and so part of this public education system. My kids are in public school in this district, and I believe in the public education system just as my colleagues to the right and left do. My mom was a teacher in public education. She was fighting the Title IX fight to implement athletics for women. She was the first woman physical education teacher in the region, and was fighting that fight in the 60s and 70s. She would be living with me today if it weren't for the collectively bargained rights of educators. And as much as I love my mom, I'm incredibly thankful for the rights that have been negotiated. We need to protect our teachers' unions. We need to make sure that our education system has the support it needs. And that doesn't just include teachers and administrators. I want to see school-based health systems. I want to see other ancillary services connected to schools, because it is where all children should have their best foot forward.
I went to public schools through my entire educational career. We sent our son to a private school because I wanted to make sure he had a diverse experience. My grandfather founded the very first teachers union in the country. I was a union teacher before graduate school. I believe that public funds should go only for public.
Put the mic a little bit further away.
Further away from me?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
Okay. I believe that public funds should only go to public education.
Great.
The best thing we do for public education is get rid of Betsy DeVos. That would be the first thing we ought to do. I went to Catholic schools. My daughters went to public schools. I'm a strong proponent of the public school system. It is the bulwark of closer. Farther. Okay. It is the cornerstone of what made this country great, and I'm a strong proponent of it. I think on the federal level, since we're talking about running for Congress, two of the things Betsy DeVos has underway, which the Congress should be attacking and should be reviewing, and probably should be subject to appropriation riders stop. She is eliminating the civil rights enforcement of the Department of Education, and she is also eliminating the rules that protect the disabled. It is unconscionable what she's doing. She is a proponent of charter schools. She will continue that as she did in Michigan when she was here at the federal level, and the Congress needs to intervene and stop her from doing it.
These are karaoke mics, so just pretend like you're singing.
We really are going to have an after party.
Yeah, party on. Okay, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next topic is healthcare, and we'll start with Paul. What is your plan for providing healthcare for all citizens?
Healthcare is one of the ways that we can dramatically improve our economy and the well-being of our people. We see from the example of Canada, they spend half as much as we do on healthcare with single payer, and they have better health outcomes. Our private health insurance has given us the wrong incentives. So I am for single payer, expanded Medicare for all. We should cover all the hearing and vision and basic drugs that are needed. And the evidence tells us, looking at other countries, that if we cover everything, if we get rid of that 30 cents on the dollar administrative and profiteering overhead, that we can have cheaper and better health care for everybody, focus on preventive before we get around to curative, include mental health, include substance abuse in our healthcare system, not in our prison system. It can dramatically reduce the cost. It can give us a healthier population. It can get rid of the hassle of dealing with private insurance.
Great.
I believe we have to start this conversation with human right. Healthcare is a human right, and if you believe healthcare is a human right, I do not believe that it's a logical follow-up to say that there is a place that you have to charge people for service. We need a single-payer, universal healthcare system so that every single person in this country has coverage and no one is barred because of cost. That, to me, is the most fundamental thing that I'm running on, and I believe that needs to be the issue that takes Democrats to victory in 2018.
I completely agree with David that healthcare is a human right. As a physician, I don't want to see anyone turned away for an inability to pay or access any type of essential health benefit. Essential health benefits are a defined class of services, and we aren't doing enough, for example, to make sure that our mental health services are covered, especially in rural areas of our country. We need to make sure that the infrastructure and the providers through the rural healthcare system, et cetera, are in place to be able to deliver high-quality health care to everyone. I believe that we can do a number of things here very shortly to get on that path that would be incredible improvements from where we are today. Medicare needs to be able to negotiate for lower drug prices. The fastest growing increases in cost of health care in the country are healthcare drugs, obviously healthcare drugs. But Congressman Upton has blocked the negotiation of Medicare with pharmaceutical companies. That's $125 billion we could be saving right there to be putting back into prevention. And prevention is also something that pays off. We need to invest in prevention more than treatment. I'll talk about that later.
So after 30 years of interviewing healthcare providers and insurers all over the world, thousands of them, I can confirm that the difference between our system and most of the rest of the developed world is that they have universal healthcare and we do not. However, we need to understand that there's only a few countries that actually have something which is pure single payer, and all of these countries have better healthcare outcomes than we do at half the cost. So there are a lot of different models that we can look at, and I believe that the idea of single payer, if that's a hard, fast goal that we have to have, and we're not going to bend on that, I think we're not going to succeed because there's way too much resistance in the general population against that. So I believe that moving forward as aggressively as we possibly can to achieve universal health care, however we do that, is the most important goal. And I would start by putting a public option on the national exchanges.
Healthcare is a fundamental human right, just like food, clothing, and shelter. And my approach to this actually is quite similar to what Senator Stabenow's approach is. I think we need to fix Obamacare. We need to reimpose the individual mandate. We need to fund the reinsurance program so that the cost of premiums stay low. And we need to provide a public policy option. And I would support her position where she would open up Medicare for those 55 and older. I think that is the quickest way to get from point A to point B. It's realistic, it's practical, it's something you can legislatively accomplish.
I turn to the Constitution for this. I don't think this should be a partisan issue. Our Constitution starts, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. If that isn't single payer, then I need someone else to redefine what promote the general welfare means. If we aren't ensuring that everybody has access to health care, and that they can afford to go to the doctor, as Matt was saying, for preventative care as well as for treatments, then we are failing as a country to abide by our own set of laws. Oftentimes folks will come up to me and say, well, you work for Pfizer, you work for Big Pharma, how can you be saying that you want to lower drug costs? And I say, there's a reason they don't hire me into the drug pricing area. We have a friend, my husband and I have a couple who we're friends with who just had their first baby. Beautiful baby boy, love him to death. Just to have that child with their insurance has cost them more money than they ever expected, and the bills keep coming. We were just talking to him, he's 6 months old. They said the bills are like whack-a-mole at Chuck E. Cheese. They keep coming. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right, this is where it's just below your chin. There we go.
It's hard to do.
Okay, I know. Next, we'll start with David. This is about the economy. What can you do at the federal level to bring good-paying jobs to Michigan?
There's two strategies that I promote for fixing economic issues. Infrastructure is one of them. If we put that real $1 trillion investment into infrastructure, we can create 11 million jobs. Those are good-paying jobs. Those could be union jobs, and those can employ a lot of people in really productive ways that fix the problems we face in the country. The other thing that we really need to do is look at small business. The Democrats need to take small business as our path to victory. We need to make sure that all of the incentives, all of the subsidies that we are now giving to giant corporations, we turn those around and help the communities by helping the small businesses that employ our neighbors. Those are things that we can do at the federal level, and those are things that we should tackle. And then just one last thing on this, single-payer health care. The big three automakers alone spend $7 billion per year on health care costs. We can take that cost off their shoulders and employ people in lots of good-paying jobs.
I agree with David in terms of infrastructure being a great place to invest, to have the, again, well-paying, livable wage jobs be what is connected to our infrastructure. But we have to also be thinking about not just roads and rails and airports for our infrastructure. We have to be thinking about the kinds of environmental changes that we can make in cities and towns, county roads, etc., that can have triple bottom line outcomes. Things that make our communities more walkable, things that make healthier choices easier for everyone to make. And that gets to David's third point, my second, about healthcare. Having public option on the exchanges, getting employers out of covering healthcare costs is a big boon to small business. Folks in this district will tell you that 5 to 7% of their gross revenues go to covering healthcare costs of their employees. I don't want employers making those ethical decisions about who's covered, who's not, and for what. So that's another part of the healthcare discussion. Last but not least, I think we need to go back and revisit that tax scam from December that only gave minimal benefits to individuals but permanent benefits to corporations.
I believe that there is no conflict between our environment and our economy, and we need to create good-paying, rewarding jobs in the green energy economy, and at the same time, take care of our planet as well to make sure that we have a place to live. There are jobs, there are a lot of jobs that will come when we convert to green energy and rebuild our entire electrical grid system. We will be having more jobs than even Donald Trump could talk about. So anyway, that's really my focus, and that's the focus of our campaign, to rebuild our electrical grid and convert our electrical grid to a renewable, clean energy. Thanks.
I served on the board of Battle Creek Unlimited as well as Southwest Michigan First, where we recruited business and retained jobs. So I have experience doing this, and also in my Kellogg life, I was involved in economic development. There are 3 federal programs I would direct my attention to. First would be fully funding the Rural Development Fund, which has been quite successful in helping, obviously, rural areas with infrastructure, business development, and investment. 2, the Economic Development Administration of the Department of Commerce. We've used that quite successfully. I've been involved in securing grants for that. We helped build the College of Aviation at Western Michigan University with the Economic Development Administration. And finally, I would reinstitute something that is no longer being used, but was actually quite successful in our activities at Battle Creek. It was called a UDAC grant, an Urban Development Action Grant, which provides matching funds for businesses that invest in certain areas, and it was quite successful in helping redevelop the whole Battle Creek downtown.
I agree with most everything that's been said here. Clean energy jobs, having the single-payer healthcare to take the burden off of the small businesses. I would also add, we need to retain the workforce in the state. We need to make sure that we are keeping young entrepreneurs here in Michigan. We have a large influx of young college graduates leaving their home state of Michigan to other places because they're able to find jobs in their field and they're able to find jobs that pay a living wage. We have a serious lack of living wage jobs here in Southwest Michigan. We have a lot of contract companies that underpay employees as well as across the state. So by tying minimum wage to our inflation rates and ensuring that everybody's getting paid what they're worth, we can retain a workforce which will help create jobs and stimulate the economy here, as well as keep our money local. We'd be able to afford to shop at the small businesses in our area. In addition to that, we need to ensure that we are supporting farmers, not large ag like Monsanto. Let's fund the farmers, not the corporations.
We need to focus on the areas of increasing demand, and that is renewable energy, not coal. It's also agriculture. We need to continue to feed the world. We have cut the agricultural research budget in half. We should strengthen that. Yes, if we could get cheaper and better health care for all, that'll not only give us better health, but it's also more efficient. Yes, a $1 trillion infrastructure plan will bring good, middle-class, good-paying jobs to Michigan, to our area. Also, let's keep prevailing wage so we keep those wages up to a reasonable level. It'll also reduce the cost of doing business, the cost of conducting our lives for everybody. We also need to fix our tax system, that this tax scam that has just passed is a giveaway to the biggest businesses, but it's not helping the average Americans. Also, our banks. We have neglected community banks, they're the ones that give the loans to our local people, while our government has supported the big banks that crashed our economy that are still too big to fail. We need to change that.
Our next area is women's health, and we'll start with Matt this time. Are you pro-choice? Okay, sorry. Are you pro-choice, and how would you ensure that women have access to abortion services nationwide?
Yeah, I'm unapologetically pro-choice. I do not believe as a spouse, as a healthcare provider, as a dad, as a person in this community, that we should do anything other than trust women to make their decisions about their own health, their own bodies, their own medical plans. I believe that the government should not have a role in that, and would fight to not only keep any restrictions out of women's health and reproductive health systems, but also fully fund women's health centers through Planned Parenthood and community health centers to expand screening and preventative care, as well as access to abortion. I believe that as a dad and as a doc, that these are incredibly difficult conversations to have, but we have to recognize that it's not just about birth, it's about quality of life. And making sure that we all work to reduce the number of abortions could be by ensuring there's public safety net and social services to improve quality of life throughout the life cycle.
I'm pro-choice. I don't believe any legislator or government official should interfere in any decision that a woman makes about her body. I believe it is fundamental down to the point of privacy. If our bodies aren't private, then I don't really know, what privacy means. So, in terms of what the government can do, the government can, the federal government can, in particular, stay out of it, but also make sure that Planned Parenthood receives funds that it is supposed to get for providing services. The federal government does not provide money for abortions. People get a lot of confusion about that. The federal government doesn't even really fund Planned Parenthood. There's a lot of confusion about that as well. And basically, the federal government pays, reimburses Planned Parenthood for services performed, and the services that they're being reimbursed for are not abortion. And I think, as being in the federal government, doing my part to make sure that that message gets out is important.
I am pro-choice, I'm pro-Planned Parenthood, and I think we also need to go after the restrictions that have been placed on UN funding for women's rights and pro-choice activities around the world. I'm also very proud of my stand on all related women's issues and the fact that Jennifer Granholm has endorsed me. And when she was fighting to become the first Attorney General of Michigan, as she said, I was the guy that showed up. When she was fighting to become the first female governor of Michigan, I was with her. And when Dick DeVos tried to take her out with $40 million, I was standing with her. So I have a good record, a strong record, and I'm proud of my record on women's issues.
Well, I am pro-choice, and I do have a uterus, so I feel like I am able to speak on this subject, and I'm not afraid to, so that's how I will make sure that women's health care is being addressed in Congress. Right now, we have a health subcommittee full of men making decisions on women's bodies. I would love to join that committee and take a stand for women everywhere, and hopefully work to get more women involved in these decisions. Women's health care is about so much more than just abortions, though. It's gotten to the point where I have to bring my husband with me in the doctor's office for them to take me seriously. And a lot of women out there know what that feels like. I see heads nodding because it's very real. So I am an activist first and a politician second. I have spoken about my period, gasp, in public places, outside of Fred Upton's office even, to talk about women's health care. So I will go in hard and strong because this is an issue near and dear to my heart, because it not only affects me, it affects my sisters, my mothers, my friends, and it affects all women, not just cis women. Thank you.
I am also completely pro-choice. I've been a very long-term supporter of Planned Parenthood, and it's a woman's right to control her own body, that the government has no place in getting involved in those decisions. We need to understand that this is only one of the rights that's being attacked right now. That equality is under attack in our country in so many areas, in terms of workers' rights, in terms of LGBT rights. We need to uphold the basic principle that this country was founded on, that we're moving ever closer towards a system of justice where we see all people are created equal, all have the chance to pursue the good as they understand it, whether it's by discrimination by race is increasing today. There have been, again, attacks on LGBT, attacks on women's rights, and in terms of who we are as a democracy, we need to be looking forward, not backward.
For me, it's a simple question. Yes, pro-choice. Yes, pro-Planned Parenthood. Yes, women's health. There's no point for us to be talking about universal health care in any way if we're not talking about truly universal health care. Women's health care is part of that, and there is no place for the federal government to intervene and prevent any woman from having that kind of health care that she chooses to have. I think that is pretty simple, and that is a settled constitutional issue.
Thank you. Our next question is minimum wage. Where would you set the minimum wage today?
Today, my best estimate would be a $15 average across the country, but I believe that average would need to be adjusted for geographic areas. So the Census Bureau is very good and has a lot of data to understand what an actual living wage would be. And I think in some areas it could be a little bit lower than $15. In other areas it's clearly going to have to be higher.
Thank you. Extra points for short answers.
Thank you.
I have a two-tiered approach. I was a corporate officer of Kellogg for years, and I've had my own small business for 12 years. I would have a $15 minimum wage, universal, for big business, and a ratcheted up lower wage that gets up to $15 that you bring in over time. And I think that accommodates both sectors of the economy. I was at a bakery the other day, actually by our campaign office, and the woman who runs it, it's called Burke's, was talking about her, difficulty in taking it all the way to 15, but maybe she could get it to 10 or 12 or something like that. I also noticed that McDonald's is now offering $10 an hour at their shops around. I drove it through Plainwell the other day. So I would have a two-tiered approach. Big businesses, whatever the magic line is, over 25 employees, 35, whatever that might be, pays $15 an hour, and other small businesses we ratchet up over time.
Today, as of right now, I would actually try to push for an $18 minimum wage on average across the nation. As somebody who has recently held minimum wage jobs, and I'm just finally now breaking free of that, the struggle is incredibly real. Living paycheck to paycheck still happens with $18 an hour, so that I think is very reasonable. When we follow back to the 1980s, around Reagan is when we see that the minimum wage started to veer off from the rate of inflation, and productivity continued to rise, but wages did not. So we need to legislate and to tie inflation and minimum wage together to ensure that a minimum wage is also a living wage. So I would fight for 18, and I actually have a plan similar to George's, where with small businesses we can help ease the burden of that change to get this rate accomplished in a quicker fashion. Thank you.
I think we need to be moving towards a living wage. As an economist, I think we need to do it in a way which actually works. So I support $15 per hour or half the regional median, which in our case would be $12 for now. And the reason for that is that if you raise it to $15 immediately, you fix it to inflation. But if you raise it to $15 immediately, a lot of people are actually going to be losing their jobs in the short term. And so you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot. Then if in addition to that, we do the things like having universal access to health care, like fully funding our food programs, fully funding the social services, having access to excellent daycare and preschool, regardless of income, then that's how we can move immediately in a short term towards covering the basic needs, and then let's move as soon as we can towards everyone having the living wage that they need.
I'm in favor of $15 minimum wage. One of the things that we've done as a campaign is that I've written a lot of detailed policy statements and started putting those on the website so everybody knows exactly how I feel on every issue that we can get to, and puts them in writing, so I have committed to various things. One of the things that we put on there in the workers' rights section is how we're going to get to the $15 minimum wage. And the details of one of the best ways to think about this is once we have that single-payer healthcare system, employers will be able to afford that, and it will take a burden off of the employees who then do not have to pay for that. We look at how we can incentivize through tax systems to help the small businesses so that they can offset the extra burden that they're going to pay for wages. And we look at productivity, which every place where minimum wage has increased substantially, productivity has also increased, and we have not seen the feared increase in prices of goods. So that's just a fear point. That's not a real point. That we have the data from places like Seattle and in other places where they have raised the minimum wage. We know this works.
I agree with a lot that's been said. That's the hazard of going sixth in a question. But of course we need to tie wages to regionally adjusted, cost of living adjusted minimum wage. There's no doubt that over 40 years, roughly, that the trickle-down economic policy has left workers behind, no matter where they're working, and that we need to be catching up. So getting to a $15 minimum wage is actually, I think, a great start, but not as far as we would go if we were trying to even catch up to where we were 40, 50 years ago. One of the things that I think is really important in this conversation is to recognize the difference between tipped and non-tipped wages. There are a majority of tipped employees are women and people of color, and we need to make sure that as we talk about a minimum wage, we don't leave the tipped employees behind. We need to make sure that that is applied across different sectors of our economy, including the restaurant and service industry. I believe, like Paul, that we need to be moving towards a livable wage that includes healthcare benefits, and so that trade-off of getting small businesses out of the business of healthcare can allow us to get to that higher cost, higher wage.
Who's on first?
All right, our next topic is marijuana. What is your stance on recreational marijuana? If legalized, would you support releasing those jailed for marijuana offenses?
Yes and yes. I favor legalization of marijuana. I think it ought to be sold like you sell liquor in a liquor store. And I think if those are serving time for just marijuana, they should be released.
If we legalize it and tax it and don't let people out of prison for it, once again, we have failed our Constitution. So yes, I'm even wearing my little marijuana caucus pin today. I am pro-legalization. I am pro-releasing folks who have been incarcerated for all drug charges, and not just marijuana. We need to decriminalize drug charges and treat addiction as a health crisis, not as a criminal offense. And it's silly that we have marijuana as a Schedule I drug. Thank you.
I'm with my other people here. Yes, legalize, tax, take it off Schedule I, get those people out of prison. I want to speak to also the prison issue, because in terms of the ways we can dramatically improve our economy, healthcare, education, a forward-looking economic policy, and criminal justice. This is a major area of not just misallocation of resources, but also one which we know is actually quite racist in its implementation. We have far more people in prison and jail than any other industrialized country. And it's not a silver bullet here, but if we deal with mental health and substance abuse primarily as public health, if we lower some of these mandatory minimums, if we make it so that when you you don't get the justice you can pay for, you have good, well-paid public defenders. If we make sure that our police systems are treating everybody equally, so people of color feel that they get the same protection from the police that everybody else gets. All these things together is right, it's also efficient.
I think my stance on this is probably pretty obvious. You see the cannabis mixer poster back there? Anybody who'd like to come join us, it's the 4th at 7 p.m., Common Solly's Bistro in Kalamazoo. We've been very at the front on this. That's one of the things about the campaign, is that I don't hide from any issue. I don't just say it in rooms like this. I say it publicly, I put it in writing, and I say it where everybody can see it. We are in favor of descheduling marijuana at the federal level completely. And descheduling and legalization are two completely different topics. Marijuana needs to be descheduled. Treat it like alcohol. If you don't know, alcohol is not federally legal. It's just not illegal. So it is legalized by the state, not by the federal government. We take it off the schedule list, and we get a social justice benefit, we get a health benefit, and we get an economic benefit. This is the time to do it. The public is in favor of it, nationally and in Michigan.
So I also believe in rescheduling marijuana from Class 1 to Class 3. I think that the standards for that are pretty clear. The Class 1 says there's no medical indication for the sale or control of that drug. I think that's phony, clearly, whether it's epilepsy, whether it's glaucoma, whether it's, you name it, pain control. Marijuana has a role in our medical system. The evidence is clear internationally, and so it does not belong on Schedule 1. We need to move it to Schedule 3, which allows for continued research dollars to go into the understanding of the medical uses of marijuana. There are about 60 cannabinoids that are part of marijuana, and we do not understand biochemically all that's available there. So rescheduling to 3 gives us a chance to do some more research there. As we legalize marijuana, and I hope everybody votes for that in November, we can tax it and regulate it and put that money back into our education system, places where it counts. I want to make sure that as we're doing so, small businesses in this area are protected so big tobacco can't just come in and take over the industry.
First and foremost, the federal government needs to harmonize the federal laws with the state and local governments who are taking the initiative on marijuana. Descheduling is one solution, rescheduling is another solution, there are other solutions. I think the main thing is that we don't want the federal government trying to put people into jail for things that the state and local governments are actually encouraging. I've had the opportunity as a member of the board of a national substance use disorder nonprofit to meet a lot of our patients, and a lot of them are incarcerated. And I absolutely believe that those people do not belong in jail. They are people, they are patients, they need help, they don't need to be in jail.
Okay, our next topic is gun control. Let's start with Debbie. Would you support the reestablishment of the federal assault weapons ban?
Yeah, I'm not going to be the squeaky wheel that gets in the way of common sense gun legislation. I think that we have some potentially rash ideas floating around that maybe have some cognitive dissonance. One of them is raising the age of purchasing a gun to 21. It makes sense on its own, but then to think that we're sending 18-year-olds off to fight wars overseas at the same time, it doesn't quite sit right with me. So any legislation that we're putting forward to reduce the risk for gun violence, especially for our children, I will support, I will help legislate. But I'm going to continue that search for a comprehensive plan that doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So absolutely, we gotta do what we gotta do to keep people safe. I always joke, I'm not a responsible gun owner. That's because I don't own a gun. But my constitutional rights to do so end when they begin to infringe on the rights of somebody else. And I'm really proud of the youth of our nation right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I support reinstating the assault weapon ban. There's no need for people to have a gun that can shoot that many bullets all at once. And our high school kids who've stood up for their own safety. I'm just really proud of them. And let's recognize who they're standing up to. They're standing up to the NRA, which is just one more example of how money in politics has corrupted our government. And let's also remember that Fred Upton has a grade of B from the NRA, while he gets a grade below F from the NAACP. He gets a grade of 14% on his environmental record. But the deeper issue with gun safety, well, with guns, is about gun safety. 60% of the deaths from guns are from suicide. And so if we can do better to keep guns locked up by their owners, if we can promote a culture of gun safety, that's going to be a way to reduce more deaths from guns. And again, more broadly, sure, you have a right to have a gun for hunting for personal safety, but let's not use weapons of war in our cities.
To answer the question the assault weapons ban of 1994, no. But assault weapons ban, yes. The assault weapons ban that we do adopt has to be very carefully addressed so that it addresses the two things that are pertinent for that, and that's rate of fire and capacity. The 94 ban had a lot of things that were really just about the cosmetics of the gun. Did it look scary? And that's not a reason to have an assault weapons ban. We need one that's real and meaningful, and that means it has to be the two things that matter, and that's rate of fire and capacity. And we also need to think about the bigger part of this issue is gun violence prevention. We'll get away from talking about gun control and talk about gun violence prevention. How can we allow people to have guns yet still have safe communities? That's the line we have to walk. This is a gun culture state. I grew up in a gun culture family. I grew up hunting. My parents, my brothers, my sisters all hunt. We are not going to stop that. We need to talk about gun violence prevention.
David's right that the assault weapons ban from '94 didn't have, I think, the best possible language. But how I would answer that question is yes, absolutely. I was working in 2001, 2002 is when I got involved in the field of gun injury prevention. I worked with 14 of the largest medical societies in the country to organize efforts to get doctors and public health officials, nurses, etc. involved in understanding that this is an epidemic and to treat it as such. When we treat smallpox or tuberculosis, etc., we take a public health approach, and the same approach can be taken to gun violence. We can engineer it to a point that's almost out of our lives. It'll never be zero, but the assault weapons ban is a part of that. Mental health services is another big part of that. As Paul said, the majority of gun injury and gun death is a suicide attempt. We are forgetting, though, many people who are left behind if we only focus on death. 35,000 people a year are killed, but another 100,000 in some years survive. We need to make sure that this is a comprehensive approach.
First of all, I want to absolutely state that I firmly believe that there is a constitutional right for individuals to own guns for self-defense and for hunting. That doesn't mean, however, that we have to allow our police force to be outgunned, and I would absolutely support an effective assault weapons ban. More importantly, as a scientist, it's particularly galling for me that Congress has actively prevented the CDC, or at least passively prevented the CDC from investigating prevention and causes of gun violence. And the first thing I would do would be to fund the CDC to undertake studies to understand the causes and prevention of gun violence.
I'm very proud that our campaign has been designated a campaign of distinction by Moms Demand Action because of our stance on guns. 1, ban assault weapons. 2, close the domestic violence loopholes, which are most dangerous for both the people obviously involved, but also for the police. But finally, and very importantly, establish what's called a red flag provision. I'm the only lawyer in this race, so now and then I look to the courts. And a red flag provision helps prevent the madness that has occurred in some of these places over the last 19 years since Columbine. And it simply allows judges to be judges. If people knew there was something wrong with these young people, Their neighbors knew it, their friends knew it, their relatives knew it. And with a red flag provision with probable cause, you can get a judge to rule that the individual should either not be able to get a gun or continue to hold a gun. It helps prevent the disasters we've seen occur. So assault weapons ban, violence loophole, red flag provision.
All right, on the subject of fracking, what is your stance on horizontal fracking? Have you signed the petition to put a ban on horizontal fracking on the ballot in Michigan?
I looked into this question very carefully when I started my campaign, and I want to be clear that fracking has been done very badly because our federal government has kept it out of the clean air, out of the clean water, has not pursued the proper regulations. My understanding of the science is that when it's done well and correctly, that fracking can be done safely. Now, I also understand that overwhelmingly, the most serious environmental challenge that we face is climate change. This is something which threatens our civilization, where our government is moving backwards, and that the priority there needs to be moving towards solar and renewable energy 100%. However, in terms of how we do that, the worst fuel is coal. And I think that sometimes natural gas can be a transition fuel as we're moving towards 100% renewable.
So to answer the question, yes, I'm opposed to fracking, and yes, I've signed the petition. I believe that we must get off the fossil fuel addiction, and that's one of the reasons why I am a strong supporter of the Off Fossil Fuel Act that Representative Gabbard has introduced into Congress that will get the United States to a completely green energy economy by 2035. We can do that. That's absolutely achievable. We already have the technology for it. Natural gas may be cleaner in some regards, but it is not a safe fuel. It is terrible for our groundwater. It is using up precious resources and destroying the planet.
As has already been said, we must be moving to a renewable economy, a green economy. Fracking and natural gas, I believe as well, may provide in some places where it's regulated more stringently than it has been to date, some transitional opportunity. I have not signed the fracking petition, but I actually haven't seen it, so I need to look it up.
It's here, right?
Okay, good. I'll take a look. Great. I just haven't seen it. But I believe that this is the first opportunity to start talking about too, because my neighbors, my family farm is in Vicksburg, right? I've been in this community. My family has been in this community for 160 years. I'm the first person on my mom's side of the family, the first male on my mom's side of the family, going back to 1861, that hasn't spent their lives in the fields. And I know and hear from my neighbors the pressure that big corporations are putting on landowners to go with the program. And I think that not only do we need to be breaking the system of campaign finance that's clearly not working, we need to make sure that the influence on local government of big oil and big gas is discovered and exposed so that people don't feel that pressure as well.
So I have also not seen it, so I'll have to take a look at it. But I'm totally opposed to fracking. I think it's a diversion, and it's actually just an escape to prevent us from moving more rapidly towards renewable clean energy. I will be happy to sign it. So that's it.
I think the issue of fracking is avoiding the real issue, which is how do we get to renewable resources? And I like to use the example. I was in government affairs for years at Kellogg Company, and people used to talk about what's pro-business, and I used to say, I have no idea what is pro-business. And people would look at me funny, and I'd say, if you work for Consumers Power, and Consumers Power said put scrubbers on the smokestacks and do all these different regulatory things to business, they would scream like stuck pigs about the rates going up. And they'd say, well, that's anti-business. If you make wind turbines in Muskegon, it's pro-business. And I, with Rich, believe very strongly that being being environmentally safe, being environmentally sound can be very pro-business and very job creation all at the same time. So I think we're being diverted, and the idea of responsible regulatory fracking coming out of Rick Perry in the Department of Energy, I just cannot imagine it. Thank you.
I have signed the petition and I'm very anti-fracking. I've had the pleasure of coming out and door knocking in Cassopolis and LaGrange, and I've talked to people, and you know, fracking is happening right here in Cass County. It's happening right here in our neighborhoods and our farms. And as a chemist, I have a background in going through scientific journals and reading the research articles, so looking into the safety of it, which safety is important, but it's also, as my colleagues were saying, it's not the big picture here. The big picture is we need to get away from fossil fuels, away from oil. So that, you know, is half of the equation. But in terms of the safety, when we have scientific studies being funded by the large oil companies, we're going to get biased towards the results that we see. And so part of what I significantly dislike about fracking, aside from the environmental catastrophe that it is, and aside from the fact that we need to be pushing for transparency in our scientific journals, is that it is just another example of bought and paid for actions that negatively harm folks in the district by large corporations and by lobbyists. Thank you.
Okay. Do you pledge to vote for the Democratic candidate for 6th District in the 2018 midterm election?
It depends who that is. No. This is going to be one of the more controversial answers that I get. Well, not that I don't cover controversy, but there are 5 people up here I think deserve this nomination. And I'm sorry, I know you've got a great record of doing wonderful things, Mr. Franklin, but I do not believe that you're the answer to the problem here. I am in this race because I believe that the problem we face is that our government has been purchased by corporations. I believe that big money gives corporations and the ultra-wealthy an unfair advantage. And those are the reasons that I am running for office, because I believe that we need a government that represents people, not corporations. And I do not believe that someone who has spent his entire career giving corporations that unfair advantage is somebody we should be choosing to represent us. I don't think that's the person who will represent us. And I don't believe that someone who's giving money to Mr. Upton in every single election is the right person to represent the Democratic Party.
I've said similar things very publicly, but Kathy's question was, would you vote for who the nominee is? And I've said publicly that I will never vote for Fred Upton, and that I will vote for the Democratic nominee. As David said, I don't believe that's going to be George, because I think that it is hard to rectify on the Democratic side. Those of us, I volunteered on Andy Davis's campaign in 1992 to run against Fred Upton. And for those of us who've been knocking on doors and working hard to get Mr. Upton out, I think it's hard to see my vote, beyond my vote, my support going to George. What that means is that if I have extra campaign cash laying around at the end of the primary, that I'll put that cash into things like voters, not politicians. It means that if I'm working on, it means that if I'm asking my supporters to knock on doors for things after the primary, that I would ask them to knock on doors for the gubernatorial nominee, the Senate nominee, obviously. But I think that Ms. Franklin still has questions to answer to earn more than just my vote.
I will vote for and support whoever the Democratic nominee is. I think if we didn't all learn that lesson in the year 2000, certainly those of us who may have voted for Jill Stein in the year 2016 and are now living with the current regime in Washington, I think we can understand that this is basically a two-party system. We can all maybe object to that or whatever, but it's going to be a two-party system for a while. And I think we have to recognize that and vote appropriately and support whoever the candidate is.
Yes.
That would be the first time.
I do have to echo what David and Matt were saying, and I was actually the first one to come out and say it. And I'm really sorry, George. I think that George is a fantastic person. He's very philanthropic. He's incredibly friendly, and I'm glad to get to know him through this campaign. But he, unfortunately, has sullied my trust. Any of the other 5 up here happily to support, and not just with the donations to Mr. Upton, but also to the likes of Tonya Schuetmaker, John Peros, and other GOP PACs. And you've come out and said that you did that in order to help fund cancer research. And to me, that sounds like that's the price that you're willing to sell out the values of Democrats and for the district, is that cancer research. And that doesn't settle well with me. And I really try to not just make those decisions based off of my own paradigm. I try to reach out and talk to others. And the fact is that I've spoken with folks in the immigrant community and other minority communities who have told me that they would rather see Fred Upton in that seat again because he would be easier to unseat, and at least they know what he's going to do. So that trust has just been broken for me in that regard, but I'm glad you're up here because everybody does have that right to run. Thank you.
You know, there is a progressive wave sweeping this country. And in terms of the things that we've been talking about, in terms of single-payer healthcare, in terms of a living wage, in terms of moving towards renewable energy, we have a real chance to move forward on this agenda beginning in January. And what it's going to take to do that is a Democratic majority in Congress. George Franklin gave thousands of dollars to Fred Upton against me. I have some memory of this, okay? But we need that majority. And I believe that if he were to be elected, that he would vote with the Democratic majority. And so I will certainly vote for him. And I will certainly encourage others to vote for him. Because if we have a chance to get that Democratic majority, and if we could imagine, I mean, we saw with my friend Sean McCann, who lost by 62 votes not too many years ago, running for state senate. Could you imagine if we got one less than the Democratic majority because this district went for Upton when it could have gone for a Democrat?
The final question in this round is individual, and it may be difficult. You know that the Republicans will stop at nothing to keep this seat. Anything that can be used against you will be fodder for TV ads and social media. These questions I'm about to ask you are based on public, readily available information that you can be sure will be used in the general election. This is your opportunity to address these questions and these concerns. No particular order. Rich, you've had a vacation home here for over 20 years, but officially moved into the district in 2017. How will you address that?
Yep, so before I ever got involved in this election, I had opposition research done on me. And the 3 things that I'm going to be attacked by Fred Upton are: I'm from Chicago, and I'm from Chicago. So, I grew up in Hyde Park. I've lived my entire life within half a mile of Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan is my love. This land over here was my love. Growing up in Hyde Park, I loved coming over here. My mother was a Girl Scout leader. She took us over here. I always wanted to live here. After graduate school, I thought there was a chance that we could move here. My wife got a great job in Chicago. I went there to live with her, and I spent 20 years, trying to get over. This was not a vacation home for us. You can look on our poster back there. Sorry, our placards, and you will see a picture of my son and myself in 1997, rebuilding our house from the ground up. So that we could move here as soon as we possibly could.
I'm going to give you 2 minutes on these questions. I think
all right,
you
okay, good, yeah.
Okay.
I kind of jumped to the end there.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
So,
Rich.
that's all right. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is that I've lived over here, myself, I've lived over here for pretty much the last 5 years because I've been able to. I was a consultant in a firm. and I could pretty much spend my time here because I chose to live here. It was actually, the plan was that we would retire here when my wife retired in next month, actually in June, sorry, 2 months from now, in June. But I did accelerate my actual, formal moving over here so that I could run, and that's the truth. But I've always been in love with the land, and 3 years ago when I started getting more involved in the politics here, I became in love with the people as well. So.
Thank you. Paul, people and some Democrats are saying that you ran against Fred Upton 2 times and lost. Why should they support you now? How would it be different now?
I think the first thing that's different now is that we have a whole different political universe with this disaster of a president, and with Fred Upton voting for him 98% plus at the time. That if we look at what has happened since the last election, we have had a surge of progressive energy, which I have helped to build, and we have had another direction on the other side. In May of last year, Fred Upton pushed this healthcare plan. He flip-flopped on healthcare. His approval fell to 39%. Before I jumped into this race, I wanted to check and see where things stood. So I did my own poll. This was in June of last year, and it put me at 42 to 44 against Upton at that time. Since then, when Upton was pushing this Republican tax plan that's a giveaway to the wealthy, his approval fell to 34%. I am the only one at this table who has experience in running a campaign in terms of bringing the critique of Upton about his failure to hold a town hall meeting, about his blocking healthcare reform, about his particular actions to raise pharmaceutical prices, about his votes against women's rights, about the litany of things that he's done that have hurt. He presents himself as a moderate. We have to present a clear, positive vision. And I think the question facing this country is a question I've been talking about throughout this afternoon. And that is, are we going to turn this economy around so it works for the majority of the people, not for the very wealthy? With campaign finance reform, with dramatic improvements in access to and reduction in costs of healthcare, in education, in criminal justice, in a forward-looking economic policy. People are upset at government, at Congress, and this is the vision that we need to win this election and bring the critique to Upton.
Matt, you refer to yourself as doctor in all your public statements. You have a medical degree, but you have not practiced medicine. Do you think this might be an issue for voters? Do you think it might be confusing?
Well, I certainly hope not. I was licensed to practice medicine in Illinois during my medical residency. I earned my medical degree. I have the $250,000 of debt to show for it. If you go to any medical school in the country, there are faculty that are in the clinical track or the education track or the research track or the advocacy track. I was the only member of the Northwestern University Medical School faculty to be on the advocacy track, meaning I taught medical students on health advocacy. That was my role in medicine. And quite frankly, I chose to be a dad over a doctor. When I left medicine, I was a single dad. Part of the reason why I have so much loan debt is because I had to take out more debt to figure out how to pay for childcare while I was going through medical school because my older son's mom suffers from a disease known as addiction. And whether it was the family court system or the WIC program or the federal student loan program, none of those things, or my family, were enough for me to figure out how to be both the dad and the doctor I wanted to be at 28 years old. When I left clinical medicine, I was fortunate enough to have opportunities that put me side by side with people all over the city of Chicago to work on children's health issues and gun injury prevention, as I shared before. Mrs. Obama was on my board working as a nonprofit executive in Chicago, working to improve the health and quality of life of children all over the city of Chicago. And I had a great opportunity as the first chief medical officer for all the YMCAs in the country to affect 100 million lives. Those are measured lives. 73 million lives were impacted by the policy changes 253 coalitions around the country implemented that I was helping to lead and fund. And another 23 million Americans just on April 1st got a new benefit under Medicare because of the work I did on diabetes prevention. So I'm proud of the path that I've taken, though it doesn't always look like a white coat.
Eppening, you qualified to run with 10 signatures over the required 1,000. You raised a total of 3,000 and currently have 200 in your campaign account, according to the internet. You have no endorsements that I saw on your website. Why do you think you can beat Fred Upton?
Because it's not about the money, it's not about the endorsements, and the signatures, that was on me because I actually had my third bronchitis diagnosis in 4 months and have been sick these last 6 months. So I have not been able to go out and do as much door-to-door as I had intended and planned on doing. So, yeah, that level of organization was just lost on me, struggling with my health just to make it from event to event. But as far as the endorsements go, I am endorsed by the Young Democrats of Michigan and my mother, so that's exciting. And it's not about the money, right? And it's because I don't ask for money when I'm talking to folks, when I'm going door to door. I've knocked thousands of doors so far, and in one of the polls that Paul recently did, we were polling in second place, the only candidate besides Paul to break 10% in the Kalamazoo area. And that's because my focus is not on raising the money, it's about listening to voters. Because the money is important for advertisement, but money is exactly the reason that I'm running, to try to get it out of politics. And I care about you, not what's in your wallet. So that's what I would say to Fred Upton, is that if he thinks that all he has to stand on is his money, a dollar burns, and we're gonna take him down. And I'm ready to be the one to have that energy, whether it comes with the dollar bills or not. Although our donation envelopes are on our table. So that's what I would say about that. You know, I'm a young candidate. This is my first campaign, as Paul said. I think the fact that we got those signatures in is incredibly admirable, and I hope Fred is a little bit scared. Thank you.
David, you never refer to yourself as a Democrat, and you voted for Jill Stein in the 2016 general election. Why should Democrats vote for you?
The first part of your question is false. You can look at any of my campaign literature, and I am a Democrat. I've always said that I'm a Democrat.
I apologize.
The second part of that question, I own it. I have no problem admitting things that I've done, and yes, I did vote for Jill Stein. I voted for Jill Stein because my experience on the platform committee. I was a representative for Senator Sanders at the platform committee. I went there, and we fought for a few things. Some of the things that we fought for. We fought for instituting, not even scrapping the cap on Social Security, but putting it at $250,000 instead of $125,000. We couldn't get that. We fought for putting real regulations on banking, bringing back Glass-Steagall. We couldn't get that. We fought for a ban on fracking. We couldn't get that. We fought for all these things that would have put real power back in the political system and taken power away from the corporations that are the donors. We couldn't get those things. What Democrat does not support Social Security? What Democrat is that? So what I left the platform committee thinking was, where is the Democratic Party going? And I saw Jill Stein's platform. It was ending student loan debt. It was ending unnecessary interventionist wars. It was putting real regulations on the banks. It was instituting campaign finance reform. These are the things that I thought were really important. And I voted for that platform because I thought that was where the people need to go. And I stand by that vote because that vote was not for President Trump. I did not vote for Trump. If you look at the votes in Michigan, there were 20,000 more people in this state who voted and did not vote for any presidential candidate than there were who voted for Jill Stein. The Jill Stein voters did not give Trump the election.
David, would you vote that way again?
I don't know. I do not take back my vote. And I think that it is a sacred trust in the United States that as voters, we have the right to our secret ballot. Yeah. When I vote in Congress, as your representative, my vote will be public and I expect to be called out for it every single time. But I don't think that one person who votes in the ballot box, in that booth, ever should have their vote questioned.
George, you've donated to Fred Upton for years and said you wouldn't run against him because he's your best friend. Why did you decide to run, and why should Democrats support you?
Well, first of all, I never said he's my best friend. He was a political friend, okay? I will admit that. I worked with Fred Upton for years, okay? I donated to Republicans, I donated to Democrats. If you want to look at the support I've given the Democrats versus Republican, you'll see it skewed very heavily. There's a reason Governor Blanchard, there's a reason Governor Granholm, there's a reason Mark Schauer, there's a reason Carl Levin have all endorsed me. They know my ethics, they know my character, they know my values. I was advancing causes in a system that needs to be scrapped. I am the first one to admit that, okay? But the causes I advanced, I'm extremely proud of. I'm very proud of working for Kellogg Company, that's controlled by the Kellogg Foundation, one of the great philanthropic institutions of the world. 1/3 of the profits of Kellogg Company go to the Kellogg Foundation. I'm very proud of the 12 years I spent in my own private business, where yes, I did try to raise money for the University of Michigan Cancer Center, did so very successfully. I did represent the International Food Safety Protection Institute, set up by the Kellogg Foundation that keeps your food safe all around the world. I did work for the Michigan rehab hospitals trying to expand Medicaid coverage. And as far as the state activities, Kate Siegel, the Democratic representative from Battle Creek, has endorsed me. And the reason why, when she was the representative of Battle Creek, I was retained by the city to represent the city of Battle Creek. And she needed help with Republicans who controlled the House, who controlled the Senate, who controlled the governorship to get things done. And I'm very proud of everybody I've represented. I'm very proud of my ethics, my character, and my values.
Okay, that was difficult for me. Please don't kill the messenger. And thank you for your candor and your answers. Okay, we have a short break if anybody needs refreshments, and please turn your questions in to Marlene.
I will survive.
That just means Kathy needs to ask harder questions, get us sweating.
We'll make more coffee. Who's here?
Is it Marlene?
Hey, any of the Cass County Dems, Marlene or somebody, can we make more coffee? It's great. Oh, wait, okay. What, 1 minute.
I didn't mean to throw the wheels on over.
Okay, we have many audience questions, so to get to them, we're going to do this in 30-minute increments.
30
all right?
minute?
30-minute. No, 30-second increments.
PowerPoint slides. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 2 questions. All right, and why don't, instead of going, you know, we'll just start with Epi and go right through. Is that all right? That's fine. Okay. All right. The Great Lakes are one of the world's greatest natural resources. What steps should the federal government take to protect them?
Well, we can start by protecting our EPA. That's critical. So with the Great Lakes, the state of Michigan and our Great Lakes, we have 20% of the Earth's total freshwater, surface freshwater. So we can have folks from the EPA stationed all along coastlines to ensure that we are continuously testing the water, protecting the integrity, working to keep the agent carp out and other invasive species. We can require that we shut down Enbridge Line 5, we can require that no pipeline should be allowed to go underneath any kind of straits or underwater across the country as we work to move off of fossil fuels. That's my 30 seconds.
Good job.
Same question?
Yep.
Yeah, get rid of line 5. We don't need that. Yeah, let's keep those aging carp out of there. But seriously, the biggest threat even to our Great Lake Michigan is still the threat of climate change. Can you imagine if we have droughts across the Northwest and our crops are failing and there are droughts other places in the world? How safe is our Lake Michigan when people are worrying about basic food? That's where we could be going within the lifetimes of some of us sitting in this room. We need to make moving rapidly for American leadership for worldwide reduction in greenhouse gases. That's the best way to protect Lake Michigan in the long run.
Stop line 5, end water mining, fully fund the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, enforce the Great Lakes Water Compact, and subsidize sustainable, diverse agriculture so it gets us off of the excessive use of fertilizers.
Again, these are all issues we talk about all the time. We're in agreement on these things. I think the other thing that I would add, especially here in Southwest Michigan, is that we have to make sure that anti-erosion protections are put in place. David and I spent a lot of time in New Orleans. The levee system the Army Corps of Engineers puts up there can help ensure we have economic development that continues and is sustainable. So we have to do all the things that have been mentioned, but we also have to make sure that we protect our communities by making sure that the EPA's reports are viable and that the Army Corps of Engineers is protecting home ownership in our communities.
Don't actually have anything to add, but the things which are most important to me are the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, make sure that that's fully funded, and to make sure that the watersheds component of that, which is the one which is most vulnerable in terms of the funding, there's always a threat that that gets cut out, and that relates to the fertilizer problem as well. The other thing I think is absolutely critical, and that is, as Paul I think said, we really need to stop climate change, because the increased ferocity of storms across Lake Michigan is actually only accelerating the beach erosion.
All of the above, and in addition though, but very importantly, people don't realize that the decision-making process has been removed from what we are in, which is called Region 5, to Washington, so it can be politicized. And Scott Pruitt and the folks have taken the authority away from the region to make the decisions, looking over our Great Lakes, air, water, you name it. So we have to depoliticize it by bringing it back to the regions where the scientists can make the accurate determination and move ahead.
Paul, what is your best weapon to beat your Republican opponent, to beat Fred?
My best weapon is his alignment with his failed party, with this failed president, and the fact that we have a system that is money in politics that's rigged our system, that's given us an economy that is working for the wealthy but not for the majority of people. And I have the clearest, strongest agenda to move this economy forward, to make it work for all of us in terms of healthcare, education, taxes, criminal justice, infrastructure, a forward-looking economic policy. My best way to defeat Fred Upton is that we have been collectively building political energy, a progressive wave that we need to continue to build collectively in order to get out that vote, in order to show people that this election is one where we can turn our country around, and I can provide the leadership for that.
Okay, anybody else then want to respond to that?
We all get closing statements, right?
Yes.
That one was kind of, I'll pass.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Oh, okay.
Good job.
David, do you have personal investments in fossil fuel production, Monsanto pharmaceuticals, and have you accepted campaign contributions from any of them?
No.
Okay.
Just real quick though, we have made a point of not taking any corporate cash, and one of the reasons that, because we don't do that and the strong stance we've taken on all those issues, is the reason we've gotten a lot of the endorsements we've gotten, and rather than go through them all, we've got a billboard back there with them on it. So.
Okay. Anybody taking the donations from in those? No. All right.
No, but I will add, just for full transparency, I do work for a large pharmaceutical company, and I do have a 401k, so, I mean, full transparency, that's the worst of it.
Okay, so David, how would you reform the recently passed, oh, I'm sorry, sorry, Matt, really, keep me on this, this is hard. How would you reform the recently passed Republican tax plan?
Yeah, so the tax plan, all of us were out there protesting it for months. Congressman Upton took the lead in protecting his big corporate donors and putting people behind them. In particular, I was hoping that they would live up to the Republicans would live up to their promise that while reducing the corporate tax, they would have closed the corporate loopholes. Big oil, big gas has got more money right now, higher profits than they've had in their history. And being able to close those corporate tax loopholes would have been a way to make sure that while reducing corporate taxes, that we didn't add $1.5 trillion of debt onto the backs of our kids. One thing that went right after that was the Budget Act just a month or so ago, and there are a lot of poison pills included in that as well that will impact health care. The cuts to Medicare that were connected to that budget deal, as well as the tax plan, will also be things that I would fight.
George?
Did you want to say it?
No.
Yeah, just real quickly on the tax plan. I would have, on the repatriation of foreign profits, allowed them to bring them back at a lesser rate, but I also would have earmarked it for infrastructure. I mean, we had $2.6 trillion coming back. They were given a tax holiday to bring it, and I think it should have been earmarked for infrastructure.
Anybody else? Oh, where are we? What steps would you take to improve the farm economy?
So, honestly, I really do believe that, am I being too loud? No, okay, all right. I really do believe that clean, renewable energy belongs on the farm as well. And one of the things that we will do will be to make sure that everybody, that all the farmers in the district are aware of the opportunities that they're going to have for clean, renewable energy and to lower their costs.
Anyone else?
Right now, we spend about $20 billion a year in incentives and subsidies for farming. And I think one of the things we need to do is make sure that every single subsidy that goes to farming has to be tied to sustainable and diverse agriculture.
One thing that's just a part of my platform is that we have cut our agricultural research budget in half, and we need to bring it back at least to where it used to be, that there's a real probability of worldwide food shortage with the advance of climate change, and we feed the world still today, and we're an agricultural area. The local foods movement, the movement towards what's it when you don't put all the fertilizers on it? Organic, excuse me. That needs to be supported because there's evidence that organic can even be more productive than with all the fertilizers and stuff. This is an area where there's enormous potential that we're not fulfilling.
You get a lot of brain farts up here, people. Yeah, absolutely. I would also add to that, while we are subsidizing the corn and the soybeans, et cetera, we absolutely need to be instituting some kind of government loan program, not with money, but with farm equipment for small farms that are just getting started until they can afford to purchase equipment of their own. And we also need to be ensuring that large farming and agricultural corporations, such as Tyson and Monsanto, aren't able to steamroll over small local businesses. It's really difficult to be a small organic farmer in Michigan right now because of all the red tape and the bureaucracy involved. It's really easy for these large corporations to buy these small farmers and force them to do their bidding.
George. There are no standards, requirements, or oversight for homeschoolers. While most homeschoolers are loved and cared for, many are not. What would you do to see that we protect and educate all students?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, education is responsibility of the state principally, not the federal government. But I think the role of the Education and Workforce Committee is to conduct congressional oversight. One of the things I do is I'm on the Levin Center Advisory Board at Wayne State University. And we literally teach bipartisan congressional oversight. And I think it's the responsibility of the Education and Workforce Committee to conduct that kind of oversight to make sure that these homeschools are legitimate, that the children are getting an education, and that the federal funds that do flow to the states, are they flowing there, are they appropriately being spent, or are they being mismanaged?
I was homeschooled for first, second, and the first half of third grade, and I was fortunate enough that my parents were doing that because of the location that we were in Wademan, Michigan. It was very rural, and they felt that that was the best way to ensure that they were taking care of me and my sisters. And we went to a homeschool association to be able to share what we were doing with each other, with other homeschoolers in the area, and to sort of federally require some kind of homeschool association to have these young children be able to go out and socialize with folks of their age and have that kind of supervised check-in regularly would be a simple solution.
Where are we? Okay. What is your what's your plan for campaigning in an effective and winning manner?
Yes, knocking doors. We have to knock doors. We can make phone calls too, that's also important. Getting advertisement on TV and radio and newspapers is critical. Doing events like this is necessary, but if we aren't out there knocking doors and staying in communication with the folks that we are talking to at those doors, we are not going to be able to engage voter turnout. So that has to be the #1 strategy, I believe, for any of us here. And it's not just our team going out and knocking, it needs to be us, the candidates, being there as well. Because we've been in a district without a candidate for too long. Fred Upton is invisible to most of us unless we can afford his time. So being at the doors, being accessible, responding on social media, those are all critical to having that effective campaign.
Okay. Oh, this is good. All of you have participated. All of you have participated in many forums. Is there a question? And I want every one of you to answer this. Is there a question that you wish someone would ask but hasn't? What is that question?
Oh, wow. Do we get to answer the question that we asked?
That's an important thing.
Yeah, do we get to answer the question that gets asked? Okay.
Wow. These forums have been great. And I think that people like you, Kathy, and people like you have done an excellent job. In terms of what I would like to be asked about personally is, Paul, what have you done to improve government accountability in your career? Because this is something that has been a passion for me for 30 years, that I got into this issue because I was committed to international development. And what I learned was that because World Bank and USAID and UN agencies were evaluating themselves, all their evaluations were coming out positive. And they weren't learning, and they weren't held to account. And I've spent a large part of my career improving, and with some effect, improving evaluation of international development assistance and teaching the next generation how to more effectively monitor and evaluate so they can have greater impact on poverty and on development around the world. And this gives me a perspective. I've read thousands of evaluations myself of government and nonprofit programs, and I can bring a perspective to efficiency and accountability in government that I think few in Congress today possess.
I think an interesting question would be, what has campaigning taught me about the district. And I think that that is something that I've really learned, because our campaign, this goes back to the question that Eponine had, is focused really firmly on voter contact. As a campaign, we've knocked on about 25,000 doors so far. We have a town hall coming up in Allegan on the 3rd, and that'll be the 19th public in-person town hall that we have held as a campaign. And one of the other things that I do a lot of as a campaign is we go to township board meetings and county commission meetings and city council meetings. And I have learned so much about this district because I've walked every inch of it. I've been out there actually in the streets and sidewalks and the rural communities and knocked on people's door and asked them what the most important issue is to them. Sat in township board meetings and listened to them talk about what the issues that they are most concerned about in their communities. So what I've learned is what the people of this town, or with this district, are most concerned about.
Yeah, I often wish that people would ask me to go further in conversations about health and quality of life. Yesterday we did an event like this. We were all together. Some of you were there as well, and it was in Benton Harbor. And at the end of the event, I realized that every question that I got from the audience was about health care, right? Because I'm the doc and because I've been associated with the Obamas and been rewriting Medicare and all that kind of stuff. But my work at the YMCA and as an executive director of a nonprofit and as a community organizer on the west side of Chicago focused on violence prevention has given me a different understanding about health. It's not just about health care. We have to make healthier choices easier choices. We have to break down the institutional isms that have led to the same people always having higher risk for poor health. And it's housing policy, it's agricultural policy in terms of healthy food, making healthier choices easier choices. I wish people would help me get a chance to explain how across the board I see health in all things, not just health care.
Parts of this question have been asked in various forms, but I would like everyone to address the question of, in the general election, how are you actually going to sustain the interest and support of people all the way from the minority communities through the liberal Democrats in Kalamazoo and into this districts such as this, which have a lot more moderate Republicans and independents? We have to bridge, we have to have a candidate that can speak to all of those people at the same time. And for me, it's my background, my life. I've lived in diverse communities my entire life. I'm a scientist, I'm a businessman. When I talk to people, Republicans, I had breakfast last Tuesday at Bert's Breakfast Corner in Stevensville, and if any of you want to go talk to some Republicans, that's where you want to go. And honestly, it's just because I'm used to speaking with these people all my life, I can communicate effectively with them.
Okay, mine is short and sweet. George, what is your favorite rock and roll song? Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run.
My question, and actually if any of you guys want to answer it, that I've wished would be asked here, is 2018's election has often been described as the year of the woman. We only have one female candidate up here. What can we do as a district to encourage more women, and especially women of color, to be willing to run for positions at this level? What can we do to welcome them with open arms and not turn them away for future elections? I'm trying to do that just by being here. Try to open that door and prove that anybody can do it. And for future elections too, I make it known and obvious that I'm willing to help anybody for any election if they need me to come knock doors or make phone calls or just chat. I'm here and available, so reach out to me. So I don't know if anybody else wants to.
All set. I don't know where we were in the row. We'll start with Epi again. This is, we'll go back to our 1 minute, 30 second. Green energy, Green energy is the goal, but fossil fuels are still part of the mix. Closing down pipelines will raise the price of gasoline disproportionately affecting the poor. There is no effective public transportation in most of rural Michigan.
Yeah. Those are very real consequences, and one of the things I talk about, and I think the other guys believe in as well, is that we have to have comprehensive legislation that examines consequences, both intended and unintended, of anything that we pass, and everything has to have a multifaceted solution. We can't have any more just Band-Aid bills. So in the process of shutting down Line 5, which we have to do for the health and prosperity of our state and quite frankly our earth with our fresh water, we need to be addressing issues like transportation. We need to make electrification accessible and available and affordable for everybody. And if that's something that the federal government needs to step in and say, based on your population, we are going to give this city X amount of electric vehicles to participate. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Zip Car program. They have cars available parked at a common location. Anybody can register, prove that they're able to drive a car. They can access that car for any amount of time for a small price. With the federal government doing it, we can make that free. There are alternatives, and we have to be willing to explore them in order to make sure that we are not leaving anybody out.
Kathy, I'd like to add that in 20 years of organizing around public health issues, and environmental health is certainly one. Spoke at the National Institutes of Environmental Health back in 2003 about built environment stuff. There's 3 lessons I've taken out of my career. The first is that coalitions need to be big enough so that everyone sees themselves in it. Framing issues like environmental change and our energy change policies in terms of health has been an advantageous approach for me to build big coalitions. Second lesson is that you can't let perfection be the enemy of the good. You have to be moving forward without waiting for everything to be in place. And the third thing that I would say, I don't have time for, I'll find another way to say it.
Anyone else?
I would just like to add that I am totally in favor of electric cars. I'm actually co-founded a company that's involved in electric vehicle charging technology. And the other thing is that I had the opportunity to ask Fred Upton a question in a forum last week. And I asked him about shutting down Line 5. And I think the interesting thing is that he approached the answer completely from an economic point of view. And my response to that is we need to approach it from an economic and environmental point of view at the same time, not just economic and not just about vested interest.
Great. So Paul, would you be willing to stop the special insurance program that Congress currently receives? Does that make sense?
Can you repeat the question?
Would you be willing to stop the special insurance program that Congress currently receives?
If I understand the question correctly, and correct me if I'm mistaken here, I believe you're talking about Congress getting some particular perks that...
Who asked this question?
Insurance.
Okay.
Yeah.
My understanding is that Congress has special insurance program that we, the citizens, don't have, and that it's, might be for life that they have it. I'm not sure about that, but that they have
Health insurance.
Health insurance. I'm sorry, I should have said health.
All federal employees have health, my late husband had that because he worked for the federal government. So all federal employees have the same, including Congress, including the president.
Well, how do the two go hand in hand with one paying, the one-payer insurance? How would you reconcile those, I guess?
Well, as you know, I believe that we need to move towards single payer. And for example, one way to do that would be to expand Medicare with an expanded Medicare for all, which means it covers more things without many of the copays that it has today, because still people on Medicare still sometimes can't afford their health care coverage. And then as a congressman, I would be happy to be part of that program.
I would just also say to that too, that the federal government should be, and anybody on the federal payroll should be getting whatever option we are putting on the marketplace. it should be that simple, and we'll have better healthcare that way.
Okay, David, what are your serious plans to revamp the way our college students are being overcharged on tuition cost? And Secretary DeVos has planned to place this problem to a third-party organization and charge the students more. Is that okay?
I would start with looking at the student loan issue. And I would say that any federal loan that's issued should be capped at the prime lending rate. There's no reason that people getting student loans should be overcharged or charged any more than anyone is ever going to pay for a mortgage. That's a place where we start. The next place, and I think that this is one of the issues that we absolutely need to be moving towards, is we need to get a tuition-free public education system that goes all the way from pre-K through college, includes vocational and apprenticeship programs. We need to do that to secure the future of our economy and the future of our student success.
Yes.
I would just like to add, when I was on the Western Board, I think we got about 75% of the funding for Western Michigan University came from the state. It was in that range. I believe now, David, Paul, you may know the number exactly, but I think it's like 25 now. And we are not funding higher education. And until we get serious about it, we are never going to be able to control the costs and allow students to get the education they need.
And I want to just jump in. I agree 100% with what David said in terms of the fact that education is an investment in our country, and it needs to be accessible from pre-K all the way through college to everybody, and let's make it free to do that. In terms of our current system, the subsidies that we provided for loans to for-profit colleges, many of which just use the internet and offer substandard programs that in many instances have gotten vulnerable students into tens of thousands of dollars of debt, which we're all paying for because that is where we've had the highest default rate on the publicly subsidized loans. Yes, we need to have free education, but we need to also maintain standards so that those universities that are right now profiting off of some of our most vulnerable young people, that those things are not permitted by our federal government.
And I agree with most of what Dave said, but I would also just like to put in a word for those people who are suffering from the student debt load right now. One of the farmers that I've met in this district is struggling. He keeps his farm going, but every night he goes to bed and he goes, you know what? I'm not just the principal is just continues to increase. I can't make progress on the student debt. So as we're trying to fix things for people coming up, we need to realize that there are also people that are really hurting right now.
The only thing I want to emphasize is that in terms of my policy priorities, that there's nothing more effective, I believe, cost effective than early childhood education. Right. You know, when we are forced to prioritize, as any of us who win will have to, I believe that the investment in early childhood education in so many different forms will pay dividends for decades. For me, in addition to addressing the student loan debt issue, which obviously I suffer from, and everyone else in this district does, I think that early childhood education piece is the priority.
Okay, Matt, how would you improve the lives and futures of the disenfranchised citizens in our rural and urban hotspots?
So this is the first generation of children who are expected to have a shorter life expectancy than their parents. I can make that blanket statement, but Kathy's point about hotspots is the part I want to pick up on. We can look at data and see that, for example, the life expectancy in Benton Harbor versus St. Joe the differential is almost 8 years. So those hotspots have accrued, have been developed by, in some cases, hundreds of years of institutional policies that keep the same communities underprivileged. The third thing I was going to say earlier about lessons I've learned in my career is that to address equality, we need to actually be focused on equity. And that means over-serving the underserved. If you have a ubiquitously available program that makes a difference for everybody, only those with resources will access it first. So we actually have to design into, whether it's housing policy, transportation policy, agricultural policy, healthcare policy, an emphasis into engaging those hotspot communities as end users of the product from the beginning.
I just really want to just re-emphasize, we at the Berrien County meeting last week, we had a discussion about education. And you know, the proposal was to make sure that we have a platform that everyone gets the same, that we bring up the education funding to where it's supposed to be, and that everybody gets up to that level. But that whole approach that just ignores the underlying problem that Matt was referring to, and that is that there are kids in schools that are not being taught by teachers, they're being taught by substitutes. So we need to make sure that we bring everybody up to the same level.
I would like to add also, and part of the question was about disenfranchised voters and disenfranchised people, and there's a ton of that in this district. Door knocking in LaGrange, I ran into tons of disenfranchised folks. And what we need to do is we need to show up, and we need to be unconventional in some of these approaches. One of my favorite places to door knock was at trailer parks. And I talked to folks who said they have not seen a candidate come door knock in their park in 2 decades. You know, these are people that are disenfranchised because we're not showing up, we're failing them. And we have to accept that self-criticism and be willing to make progress and improvement to access those folks.
Okay, we're at Rich. What has been the effect of the Trump presidency on America?
1 minute.
Where do I begin? Honestly, I mean, we were talking about this just the other day. The next president that comes in can't be an average president. Right? They have to be someone, it's got to be somebody like George Washington, who's going to come in and say, you know what, we've now destroyed a lot of our norms. And we can't just go and act as if nothing ever happened, because then all of the things that have been destroyed will continue. We'll continue having spokespeople that just outright lie. Just stand up there and just lie. And that's just not acceptable. So honestly, I think the next president is going to have to come in. It's going to have to be a commission, probably formed from representatives from the Clinton administration, the Bush 1 administration, even, my gosh, Bush 2, and the Obama administration. And actually, you know, every single process that goes through is going to have to be reviewed by that commission, and they're going to have to look at it and say whether or not we're now conforming to the norms that we used to have.
I mean, he is such an embarrassment, and his disbasement of the entire institution is going to be with us for a long time. And I am very worried that young people are going to lose their faith in government and these very institutions we rely on. It is going to be similar to Vietnam, when we found out the government lied, couldn't be trusted, and there was a total lack of faith. And what he has done is unconscionable.
There are two things I want to put in here. One is the dark side, and we all know all the awful things that Trump has done, and one of the worst is this corruption. Corruption's become the narrative of our times, whether it's his secretaries, whether it's himself, whether it's his attorneys, whether whoever it is. Corruption is the story of this presidency. I do differ from Georgia. I don't think that that young Americans are leaving the system because of Trump. I think he's energizing the system. And that's why the progressive movement is so powerful right now. That's why the blue wave is coming, because we're coming for Trump.
I think that we need to recognize the danger that democracy is in around the world. That historically, we have been the beacon of democracy, but with Trump, we are not a good example. And with China coming up and Russia, democracy, the future of democracy is in danger. How do we best turn this around? The best way we turn this around, when we get a Democratic majority in Congress, and then when we get a Democratic president, is by robustly pursuing an agenda that supports the well-being of the people.
I want to kind of try to echo some of David's positive sentiment here, and let's get a quick visual of what this effect has been. Can you stand up or raise your hand if this is your first election cycle you've ever attended a candidate forum or volunteered for a candidate? Yes, that is also the effect that he's had. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're at George, right? What is your opinion of the economic growth, regulatory relief, and consumer protection?
Are you talking about the law in existence now that Mulvaney is decimating? Is that what we're talking about here?
Whose question is this?
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. You know, I mean, what they have done is it's incredible to think that Mulvaney, who is now in charge of the Consumer Fraud Protection institution that was set up under the Obama administration, has now limited public access to it. It is going to the very heart of it, and he is limiting public access in order to control it. And you know, I keep going back to congressional oversight, but since you have Republicans running everything, there's no one looking into it, there's no one overseeing it, there's no one preventing him from doing what he's doing. But he is, you know, it's like the rest of the Trump administration. They have taken something, flipped it on its head, and totally destroyed the very mission for which it exists.
You know, Elizabeth Warren gave us the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and she is an example of this progressive wave that we see building. This is why I think that the crisis of the Trump administration provides an opportunity for taking our government and our country in a new direction in a way that we have not seen since the New Deal. And that we have progressive candidates, I will say, like 5 of us at this table, across the country. We have a more progressive Democratic Party than we have ever seen in our nation's history. We have a chance to turn this country around.
I think we know that piece of legislation more aptly, if we called it by what it is. It's the Banking Deregulation Act that they just pushed through Congress. And it's absolutely awful. It's a disaster. This is one of the cases where I'm sad the way our senators voted in this state. Both of our Democratic senators voted to deregulate banking with this bill. And this is something that puts our economy in jeopardy again. This would, the Countrywide, the bank that wrote most of those subpar mortgage loans that crashed the economy in 2008, would have escaped real serious regulation because of this. This is a bad bill.
Yeah, and to pile on, I just would say that whether it's consumer protections in healthcare, in even just think about it, not just banking, which is tied to housing, etc., that what we're seeing over and over again is the influence of dark money in politics. Mulvaney also said this week, I don't know if you saw his quote, that unless you had given money to him as a congressman, you didn't get a chance to meet him. Right? Those are the rules of the game in DC, and I think that while we are talking about this particular aspect of consumer protections, I want to put forward that whether it's patient-centered care, whether it's student-centered education, we need to put people first and get those corporate dollars out of our political system.
I'll just add one comment on the banking bill that just passed. It was in the title. It talks about protecting community banks. Community banks are under threat, and they need help. But there is nothing in this bill that actually protects them. It's just a thin veneer, and then it's all about saving making it easier for the largest banks.
Okay, where are you? Effie? our county, and I think you've addressed it a little bit, our county does not have, well, actually, it's a different question. Our county does not have a good record for voter turnout. Specifically, how will you attract brown and black voters?
I kind of addressed this yesterday too, and it starts by addressing the fact that we are an all-white panel of candidates, and our first and foremost job is to just shut up and listen for once. We are constantly going into disenfranchised communities and telling folks what we're going to do to help them, instead of listening to the solutions that they already know and are aware of that we can help implement. We need to ensure that our goal is not to just take this seat and then be like Fred and Hyde. We need to be willing to come out and talk to voters, and we need to build community and coalition, not just show up to earn somebody's vote or to demand it even. We saw it in Alabama in the election there, we rely especially on black women to vote Democrat every single time, and then we turn around and do next to nothing for them. We need to be seeing how we can support businesses, small businesses owned by people of color in the community, how we can lift these communities up, how we can restore their infrastructure because of environmental racism, and I'm sure the other guys will chime in because I didn't even get to finish all of it. There's so much.
In terms of what Epi was saying, one of the things that my campaign has been doing is a series of Let Your Voice Be Heard sessions. So it's not me going out and giving speeches, but coming to Cassopolis, coming to Vandalia, coming to African American disadvantaged communities in Kalamazoo and across the district, and with a forum where people get to articulate their issues, to get to prioritize, get to explain what they see to be the real concern, what they need, what they want to see from Congress, what they want to see different from our federal government, and then I as a candidate have a chance to respond, and we're going to continue to reach out to the African American community, to the Hispanic community, and to others across our districts, as well as going to where they are and talking with them and just being open to who they are, what they have to say.
I'll just add that that's, turning out and helping the minority communities in this district has been a central focus of my campaign. Is growing up in Hyde Park, I'm used to and love diverse communities. After yesterday's forum, we went out and knocked doors in the projects with one of the local ministers. And what we see every time we do it, we've knocked just about every door now in Benton Harbor, and a whole bunch of doors in the minority communities in Kalamazoo. We start with one person, and then that person gets excited, and then they help us knock the next doors, and it's kind of it's its own little wave.
I think these communities want to see actions, not words. They're tired of lip service. And a couple things I've done is, when I was once again on the Western Board, I set up a national minority recruiting program with the Organization of Black Airline Pilots and Delta Airlines to recruit minority pilots, bring them to Western, and get them jobs with the regional carriers. I also, just a few weeks ago, have set up a micro loan program with the Northside Business Association for people that did not qualify for loans with normal banks, but we got a grant that enabled them to go to a separate board and be able to start businesses. They want action.
The only thing I will add is an observation again that relationships and coalitions are built at the speed of trust. And until you show up and show up and show up and show up, you haven't earned that trust. So I think we've all addressed that in our different answers to this question, but what I do know is that Fred Upton does not show up. And the biggest reason, whether it's town hall meetings or et cetera, that we can kind of point to here for us to get organized, is to represent those who have been disenfranchised. That's something I can tell we're all very passionate about.
Okay, we're at Paul, right? Okay, what is the purpose of armed forces in the U.S., from local police to the federal level, and do they achieve this purpose?
At the federal level, we have got ourselves involved in foreign wars that have not enhanced our safety over the last decade. I was out on the street before the U.S. invasion of Iraq. That was when the Kalamazoo Interfaith Coalition for Peace and Justice that I chaired, that we got started. Sadly, our Congress has given up its constitutional responsibility to the president. We need to take that back. That's the first thing, one of the first things that I'm going to work on. But I think more broadly that we need to understand that our U.S. position and power in the world is better grounded on working together on common challenges than on military might, particularly when it means supporting dictators and others that do not share our fundamental values. I believe that the biggest issue for common cooperation is going to be climate change. We can work there. I didn't get to police, but the issue with our police forces is, I think today, that there have been too many, particularly black men, who have lost their lives to the police. So we can turn that one around.
Just to add on there, I'm absolutely opposed to the policy of interventionist wars that we've been pursuing for this past 50 years. We need to get away from that. We need to shrink the size of the United States military. It's not going to cost us national security to have a smaller military force. And we need to absolutely fight back against the militarization of the police. This is one of the awful things that Mr. Trump has done, is trying to force the excess military hardware into the hands of our police.
And all the things that we've been talking about all afternoon long, the things that we want to see done in the world that can help so many people live their healthiest possible lives, their highest quality lives, take resources. And to look at just where we are from a budgeting standpoint, we're clearly spending far too much in our Department of Defense. There's an incredible amount of waste that we can capture and put into other places of our economy, our education system, our healthcare system, to produce better outcomes. I would like to see our Department of Defense be more focused on helping people and countries in need. Think about the aircraft carrier off of Puerto Rico than being involved in drone strikes in Syria. After the audit of the Pentagon, I hope we have the chance to be more surgical and get involved in making those value-based changes to our budget.
I just think this is so fundamentally important that I'm just going to chime in, even if I'm saying the same thing. Our military budget is way too big. We spend more than the next 11 countries combined. If we knock that down to being more than the next 6 countries, we would still outspend China 2-to-1. I think we'll be okay. And all of that money we can use, it's actually, that just is enough to rebuild our entire electrical grid system, just as one example. And as far as our police are supposed to ensure domestic tranquility, but sometimes they have to learn to step back rather than push forward.
I agree with what's been said about our overseas and our military, and diplomacy needs to be first, second, and third option. So I'm going to drill a little bit more down into the police, since that is so critical to our nation right now. Our police officers are responsible for upholding laws. The issue with that is we have a lot of unjust laws, and we have a lot of officers who are willing to uphold those. I was actually listening to a song about what we can do to police on the way over here that I can't repeat into the microphone. You know which song I'm talking about. And we have to make sure that we are holding our police accountable for their actions. It took one incident at Starbucks for them to shut down to do racial training. How many more men and women have to die at the hands of police before we make sure that their gun training and their weapons training is being adequately performed?
Okay, David, what can the Democratic Party do to attract and energize young people to get involved and to vote?
Vote for me.
What else?
What we really need to do is we need to run on issues. Yeah, there's a lot of things we're saying up here. We're talking about Trump and we're talking about Upton, and those things are right, and we need to be against those people. But we can't win on being against people. We need to be winning on being for things. We need to have the right issues. We need to have energy. We need to bring young people. We need to bring women. We need to bring people of color. We need to be what the Democratic Party says that it is. We need to be the progressive party that's fighting for unions, fighting for working class people, that's fighting for Social Security, that's fighting for all the right things that we really need. That's what we need to do.
So I also believe that we have to not just talk about bringing things to those young people. We also just need to go where they're going. You know, in the issue of the gun injury prevention debate, right? They're taking a lead, and thank goodness that they are. You know, I helped in many ways to organize groups around the country to get involved in the Million Mom March. Anybody remember the Million Mom March? You know, that was about gun injury prevention back in 2005, and what happened? Nothing. Having the youth out there now, we need to support them. When we talk about building coalitions, it means supporting each other, not just leading and hoping folks will follow. In that particular instance, I'll be doing whatever I can to give them their voice.
We've had a lot of discussion in the various, make sure the laws come through. We have a lot of discussion in the forums about physically how are we going to communicate with young people who are growing up, because, you know, is it Snapchat, is it Instagram, or whatever, and that's always changing. What we've found is that actually just go where they are and talk to them. And you know what? Maybe it's because they're up to here with social media, but we found that they just like talking. They like listening, they like talking. And so I think that's how we're going to do it.
I think you treat them with the dignity and respect they deserve. And I think we also need to follow when they lead, like in the Parkland shooting. And they are leading us. And it is dramatic, it's profound, and it's due our respect and support.
Okay.
Oh, I have a response, yeah.
Sorry.
Well, we're here. These things all sound great, but then we try to run and have a seat at the table. I'm 24 years old, and I've been told so many times, you're too young to win. But it's the kids that are standing up to the NRA. It's the kids that helped end the Vietnam War. And it's the kids that helped write the founding documents for our country. If I am to win this, I would not even be the youngest person to ever hold this seat, because way back when this was first getting started, they were making exceptions for men even younger than me to hold these seats. This is a new cultural shift where we're willing to say that we want to encourage and incorporate young people, but then when we ask for a seat at the table, there's still a stigma. We're still not feeling welcome. And the way we do that is we have our voice represented by us. Thank you.
Okay, Matt, are you? I think negative campaign advertisements are very negative indeed. They turn voters off to candidates and the democratic process. How will you handle promoting yourself?
You know, like a lot of us, I'm a first-time candidate, and you know, we have to be able to share our stories to be able to get voters to even recognize why it is that they would vote for someone other than Fred Upton. I think that in addition to sharing information about our backgrounds and what we've accomplished in our careers, we also need to be able to create a contrast with Congressman Upton and his record. We have to be able to show voters that there's a different way forward. Anyone, I say this a lot, anyone under 48 in this district has never had a chance to vote for anyone who's won this seat except Fred Upton. To flip those swing voters, to encourage the younger voters to come out, we have to be able to show why Fred Upton is not the best representative for people. So, you know, I will commit to talking about people's records, and I think that we have to create contrasts to be able to beat Fred, and at the same time we have to get our stories out in a positive way that inspires people there. So it will be both and.
I think the importance that we have to understand is that voters need somebody to vote for. So after hundreds of interviews that I've done with people all over the district, the thing that's obvious to me about why people who are in the middle keep voting for Fred Upton is that we haven't offered them somebody that they were willing to vote for. And so I totally agree, a negative ad is not going to actually convince them to not vote for Fred Upton. They have to look at the candidate and decide that I want to vote for that person.
I think people are sick to death of negative advertising. I think they also want some civility restored into the debate. And I don't want to beat the Tea Party by becoming the Tea Party. That is not where I want to go. And my good friend Mark Schauer, when he was a one-term congressman and voted for Obamacare, the Tea Party was outside his office screaming, hollering, yelling, shouting him down at public meetings. I found it offensive then. I found it offensive if we do it. So we have to start right here and now, starting a new discourse and a new civility.
Rich, what are your priorities in foreign affairs policy?
First of all, not getting into unnecessary wars. Second of all, removing ourselves from situations where we can now, and backing off militarily and filling in diplomatically.
One, I want to see American leadership on climate change, not just getting us back into the Paris Climate Agreement. It does not get us anywhere close to where we need to be. We need to have a much stronger global agreement, because it doesn't matter where the carbon pollution is, if it's in China or in some other country, we've got to get that down. That's an enormous foreign policy issue for us. I think that if we want to have credibility as promoting democracy, that we need to speak to Israel-Palestine, because it's been our support for the Israeli state that has allowed them to treat the Palestinians in Gaza basically like as an apartheid situation, and we need to deal with that. And yes, as my other friends here, move towards from military to diplomacy.
Yeah, adding to what you were saying, Paul, we absolutely need to get our embassy out of Jerusalem. I don't know what Trump was thinking putting that there. He probably wasn't thinking all the time. And we need to, I would also add, because I agree with what's been said so far, we need to really scrutinize and focus in on the amounts of weapons that we're sending overseas. We're also sending them to countries where they're being resold to the very terrorist organizations that we're trying to fight. We absolutely need to gain control of where our weapons are going, and we need to ensure that we're putting safety over profit.
We have tremendous power in the world. We are not just the most powerful military, we're the most powerful economy, we're the most powerful cultural force, and we need to harness that energy. We need to make sure that we win the foreign policy battles through diplomacy. We win the foreign policy battles through forming alliances and using our economy, and we win the foreign policy battles by using our cultural soft power. Those are the ways that we move forward as a world leader.
Okay, we are about 5 minutes to 5. The questions were fantastic. I'm sorry there's a few we couldn't get to. But why don't we have a 1-minute wrap up, and then again, please stand. I'm done.
All right, well again, I'm Eponine Garrett, and really thank you guys for being here, because without you here, I say this every time, it would just be us sitting here mostly agreeing with each other to an empty room. And without you being here, none of us stand a chance at unseating Fred Upton. So get out the vote, take a friend with you to the ballot box on election day. This district is not ours to win, it's yours to win. We need each and every one of you to be part of the democratic process. Yeah, you can clap if you want. I have information, an email sign-up sheet over by the poster. I have to give a shout out to my incredible husband. He has been trucking through this. He hates social interaction, so be sure to go say hi to him and make him feel uncomfortable. And yeah, really proud of him, and really proud of you all for being here. This, I honestly just can't say it enough. So that's all I have. I think you've heard me enough today. Thank you.
We win this election, I believe, by focusing on the fundamental political problem in this country today, and that is economic inequality. That is a system that is rigged. That is the fact that the standard of living in our district since Fred Upton went to Congress 32 years ago has been flat, while the stock market has gone up 700%. We win by presenting a clear, detailed agenda for how we improve the well-being of the people in this district. in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, in terms of jobs, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the things that we've been talking about here today, but with the details as to how our children's generation can be better off than we are today. That's, when I've been going around the district, people are worried. Our country's going in the wrong direction, that our kids are not going to be as well off as we are. And to turn that around, it's not a little tweak here, it's not a little tweak there. It's single-payer health care, it's dramatic improvements in education, it's reforms to our criminal justice system. And I believe that I bring the experience and the knowledge and the commitment and the background and the understanding to promote that agenda most effectively in Congress, and that is why I'm asking for your vote.
2018 is a really special year. This is the year that they've pushed so far from the right, and we've grown so much from the left. This is the year that we can win in a seat that's been out of our reach for a very long time. This is the year that we can not just win, but we can win big. We can win in a way that creates transformational change. This is the message that we've been carrying through the campaign, and that's why we've been at doors, we've been holding town halls, we've been doing beach cleanups and highway cleanups, we've been going to police community meetings throughout the entire campaign. We've been at this for about a year. And that's why we've got so much support from national organizations. That's why when the Michigan Democratic Party Progressive Caucus had their forum and decided who to endorse, they endorsed our campaign because they decided that this was the message that they wanted to see carried forward. So when it comes time in August and then around in November, think about where your candidates have been spending their time. Think about who they've been talking to. And remember that we are having an election, not an auction.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity maybe to flip this district, but it's so important, right? We need to not just win here, but win across the map. We've seen incredible results in Virginia and Alabama and Texas and even Arizona, a close loss in a 22% Trump district by Doc down in Arizona. We all have to do our part to provide the greatest possible resistance to President Trump's agenda, and that means getting upped and out. We can run on all the issues and ultimately get through the primary, but voting is going to be an emotional act when it comes to November of 2018. And the reason why I'm running and the reason why I believe that we'll be able to flip this district is because A, I'm from and of this district. I've been around this community my whole life, and going back to my great-great-grandparents here in this town, in this district. B, we can provide the sharpest possible contrast on health care, an issue that everyone cares about, and Congressman Upton's been on the wrong side of. And C, we'll have the ability to communicate across the district. I need your support. August 7th is an important day for all of us.
Just in case it's not obvious, my name is Rich Eichholz. I'm going to, as your congressman, I will be using my science, my business, and my negotiating background and experience to build a 21st century economy that works for everyone, protects the planet, and provides for universal health care. And I'm going to be able to win in November because I'm the one candidate, there's 6 of us here, but I'm the one candidate that can attract votes all the way from the left through to the moderate Republicans and independents in this district. Thank you.
Kathy, Cass, Democrats, thank you all for being here. This has been terrific format. I will win this with your support. I did not just parachute into this area. I've been involved, active, building coalitions, making a difference for over 30-some years. I was a corporate officer of Kellogg. The head of the union of Kellogg when I was there has endorsed me. I am the only candidate here that has a major union endorsement. The United Food and Commercial Workers have endorsed me. I'm a small businessman. I've had my own small business for 12 years. I can take this to the parts of this district where we haven't been able to go, being a corporate officer at Kellogg, a small businessman with union support. I can build the coalitions, I can attract the independents and the moderate Republicans we need to win this. Thank you.
As I say, we have an embarrassment of riches. You are.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy.
I've never seen such a distinguished plan. I think your grace and good humor and wonderfully informed answers are we're proud of all of you. So thank you for being here. Please hang out for a while. Still, what to do, what to do.